Now, I got involved in this issue a bit later than you did. I got involved because of the Tampa.
A bit more crucially than I did too.
When I got involved, I thought the only way things would be improved would be by getting the facts out to the public, which is why I went against all my barrister instincts and started speaking publicly. I thought it would take 6 months. It was a bit of an underestimate. It's now 15 years later and things have got worse, not better. Why is it that getting the facts out to the public don't make any difference?
Because if you think you're being protected from invasion, from being overrun, from losing your country, you're happy to go along with what your leaders on both sides of Parliament tell you is necessary. You trust them. There is, in Australia, for all of our sort of surface contempt of politicians and, jokes about them and despair about them, etc., deep respect for government, deep respect for authority. Government and authority and leaders are telling Australians this is what has to be done to protect your borders from invasion.
Yeah, well, I guess if it works for both major parties, then it'll just keep on happening.
And the press will continue to find it very difficult to report an issue where both sides of politics are in agreement and the results are cruel.
Why is it hard to report matters like that?
Because you don't have people to quote. You don't have people with public backing to quote. That brings authority to argument. We can quote archbishops, we can even quote you, but what we need to quote to give power to argument are political leaders. No, you need somebody who's been elected. You need a leader of the opposition, or you need a Prime Minister, somebody who represents millions of Australians who's willing to say that this is no longer on, it's got to stop.
Well, if we had a political leader in the country, somewhere, anywhere, it would make a difference, might, at least.
As things stand at the moment, a political leader on either the Conservative or the Progressive side who stood up and said, these are decent people fleeing for their lives, making their way here in relatively small numbers, though much bigger numbers now than once were, and we should welcome them, would be finished in a week.
Well, David, why has the situation deteriorated as badly as it has?
The pity is that this is an issue that might have been settled by the High Court. If the High Court had had the courage to realise that this is not just detention for processing, which the law allows, but this is detention for processing under conditions which are deliberately punitive, and that is punishment without trial, which the law does not allow. But the High Court has never had the courage to say to the government, you can't do this in that way. You can't use these people as an example to deter others.
Well, that was the argument in Beirut. It went down 5-love.
It's just the gutlessness of the High Court on this issue is a great lesson.
Now, mandatory detention was introduced in 1992 by the then Keating government, with Jerry Hand as minister.
Yep.
But that was after similar approaches had been tested again and again in the High Court.
Yep, it was given a tick by the High Court, and ever since then, it has encumbered policy on refugees in this country. It's made everything clumsier, more expensive, more dramatic, crueler at each step of the way.
And pushing the boats back is justified ostensibly by saying we're worried about people drowning at sea, but we're not allowed to know the fate of the people who are pushed back.
Now, secrecy has been part of this operation from the beginning, a level of secrecy, but the deep secrecy of the last 3 years is new. On water matters we simply wouldn't be told about them. And it is to the shame of the press that they didn't just scream censorship. And in my view, none of the traditional media outlets in Australia fought hard enough. They should have banded together, they should have gone to the Prime Minister, they should have demanded an end to this bizarre secrecy in peacetime, a deeper secrecy than would be expected in wartime. The enemy here is not soldiers. We're talking about refugees. And that continues to be a serious criticism of the media in Australia. I sit here thinking, despite all the evidence, that maybe just keeping on reporting is going to solve the issue. You sit there, despite all the evidence, thinking a clever court case might solve the issue. That just shows how desperate we are. We are out of ideas here, man. We are out of ideas.
I think that there are some approaches that might just crack the thing open.
I love the way you remain so sunnily confident about the possibilities of litigation as a solution to this. After defeat, after defeat, after defeat, after defeat, there you are. You're still sitting there saying the courts can solve it. I don't see any evidence for that, Mr. Burnside. Well, I can't suggest any journalistic approaches that might crack anything open.
No, well,
after this year of great revelations and no change to policy.
When did Q Jumper enter the language in reference to boat people?
At once, Q Jumper was being used, and they were people who had bad manners, but very quickly they also became illegals. Now that meant that if these people were loose on our streets, they would be criminals. We would be letting in a criminal element, people who broke the law. Of course, there's no law to break. If you've signed the refugee conventions, you agree to allow people to come without papers. That's the point of being a refugee. There's never been a law to break. And the rhetoric was used to pander to those Australians who were still panicked by the possibility of invasion by boat.
I mean, if the illegals, Q Jumpers, tags have had their, have had an effect on public policy or public attitudes to government policy, then either the coalition has to stand up sometimes and say, look, we've been calling them illegals and Q Jumpers for 15 years, we were lying.
When the Abbott government came in and there was a government decision that they were to be referred to at all times as illegals, I naturally, as a journalist, went down to the Minister for Immigration's press conferences, which he would hold with a general, and I would say, oh, Mr. Morrison, which clause of the Migration Act are we talking about here that makes them illegal? And I thought he would have an answer, but he didn't. He said, look, maybe Section 4. So I went away and had a look at Section 4. No, that doesn't do it. So I came back, gave it another go. No. My view is that at every single one of his press conferences, he should have been asked that question every single time.
Yeah. My impression is that the majority of the population get their news primarily from Murdoch sources, and the Murdoch press runs the government/opposition line on boat people. They do not contradict the illegals tag or the Q Jumpers tag.
You're wrong in one respect and you oversimplify in another respect. The biggest reach for newspapers in Australia is now through newspaper websites, and that's overwhelmingly Fairfax, the ABC and the Guardian. So the reach of the press that is decently discussing these issues and decently reporting these issues is big, and the authority of the people who do it is high. So Australia has no excuse one day for saying, I didn't know what was happening. It's all there.